Speaker, it's very interesting that even those Brexiteers who've made Brexit their life's work are concerned about their own financial interests. The honourable member for North East Somerset, for example, is relocating his hedge fund to the Eurozone. The honourable member for Wokingham is advising his clients to disinvest in Britain. So will the Prime Minister ignore her Foreign Secretary, listen to workers and secure an agreement that safeguards jobs in this country?
But the right honourable gentleman, I think, through most of his career, has actually been rather a Brexiteer himself. Why is it then that at every stage he and the Labour Party are trying to frustrate Brexit in this House?
The right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, referred to me in his comments earlier. Now, he's only been a member of the House for 35 years, so he may not have learnt the form that it is considered good form to tell other members in advance when you are going to refer to them. But that is not the point. What the right honourable gentleman said was false in all respects. My company does not actually run any hedge funds, so to have moved a hedge fund would have shown a remarkable acrobatic nature within the business. But we have not, in fact, moved a fund out of this country. And I wondered if he might like to take this opportunity, as he's still in the chamber, to set the record straight, rather than be otherwise a peddler of false news, or perhaps guilty of terminological inexactitude.
I know that terminological inexactitude is of unfailing interest to the honourable gentleman, who appreciates the historical significance of the term that he's just used, and is perfectly open to the Leader of the Opposition to come to the box if he wishes to do so. All this hand-waving is rather unseemly, but the right honourable gentleman isn't under any obligation to do so. The honourable gentleman's made his point, and it's on the record, and I thank him for making it, and we will leave it there.
Unfortunately, I think the answer is yes, that momentum, in all senses, is with the left, though I agree that it's not necessarily the most intellectual momentum. It's a momentum from principles. The great success of Jeremy Corbyn is that he has persuaded people that the policies he believes in come from the fact that he is a socialist, and that therefore you see in what he is advocating a golden thread of belief and principle, as Nicky was saying, authenticity, that underlines what the Labour Party is trying to do. So, when you consider the conference that they've had at Brighton, you realise quite quickly that of course they want to renationalise the railways. They are socialists, that is what socialists do. Of course they want to have free tuition for everybody because they're socialists and they like spending other people's money. That is what socialists do. And it gives a background to their individual specific policy precepts that they have clear principles. And that's why I think they have so much appeal, because many people, not just the young, are idealistic. And they want to think that there are politicians who will follow their principles rather than their major concern being office. And that this has faced us with a real challenge, not because we don't have principles, but because they haven't been what we have been talking about in recent years. And this has quite a long history. And I'm not going to give you a long history lesson, particularly not, as Sir Roger knows much more about everything than I know about anything. So if we're going to have history lessons, we get it from Sir Roger. But if you go back to Tony Blair's election victory, he wins on the basis that he has given up socialism, but that he will manage things a bit better than a worn-out Conservative government will do. And we then carry on in 1997, 01 and 05, we are still fighting as clearly identifiably Conservatives. But by 05, we lose very heavily again, and we think that the answer is to be a bit more Blairite or else we'll never win. We think that Conservative ideas are intrinsically unpopular, so we come up with all sorts of nonsense. We want to share the proceeds of growth. We want to have 0.7% given in overseas aid. We want to do things that match Labour because we have given up in confidence of our principles. And unfortunately, we do it at just the wrong time, because the financial crisis comes, and as we were sharing the proceeds of growth, we don't have a principled narrative explaining why it wouldn't have happened if we'd been in charge. So we have to carry on with this idea that what we're good at is being competent managers who will run things well, but not that our policies flow one from another because of our underlying understanding of what it is to be a Conservative. And this doesn't mean we don't do great things. We do really important and serious things, and I particularly highlight Ian Duncan Smith's welfare reforms and Michael Gove and, of course, Nicky's education reforms. These were very much important, successful policies, and they had underlying principles of themselves, but there was no overarching conservative basic principle that made you know what the policy would be. You just argued for it because it was a good idea. And this, I'm afraid, reached its apogee in the election manifesto. That as you read the election manifesto, which no doubt all of you did assiduously, page after page, I did, and it won me one specific vote, because somebody came up to me and said, is it Conservative policy to get rid of the tolls on the Severn Bridge? And because I'd read the manifesto, I knew the answer was yes, and that was one vote in bag in North East Somerset. So it's a useful thing to do. But its flaw as a document was that as you turned the page, you couldn't guess what the policy was going to be, because there wasn't that underpinning that made one policy flow from another. So there were some good ideas, there were some bad ideas, but they didn't have an underpinning. And what I think is so disappointing about this is that Conservative values are enormously exciting for all generations. I loathe this idea that we've got to give baubles to young people. I think it is so desperately condescending. Young people are not some alien species who we have to treat differently from other voters. I'm sorry to say that I was young once. I wasn't. I wasn't very good at it, but I was at least technically. I was technically a youth at one point in my life. But that actually young people, old and middle-aged people, want to understand what our principles are, and our principles are really attractive. What do we believe fundamentally? We believe that individuals making choices for themselves build up society, and that making decisions for themselves is better decision-making than can be made for them by the state. And when you say to anybody that they can decide their own life, that's an attractive thing, isn't it? Particularly, you say to people who have just left school and the authority of their schoolmasters, and indeed schoolmistresses, you say to them as they're leaving the authority of their parents, or you say to elderly people who don't necessarily want to have exactly the same nursing care as the next person, but they will have choices. That's really attractive. And the other thing we always believe in as Conservatives is that we want to help people lead the lives they choose for themselves, not tell them how they ought to lead their life. So we're enabling people to buy their own home. We want people to keep their own money because we think they will spend it better than the government will spend it for them. We have enormous confidence in democracy, even when it doesn't vote in a way we like, because we think the mass random decisions of individuals are collectively better than the wise old birds in Whitehall, or for that matter, in Brussels. So yes, I agree with the question that the momentum, let's say intellectual for the purposes of this debate, but in truth, the view of principles. And what we need to do as Conservatives is recognise that being enormously competent is not enough. We need that golden thread running through that means that the voters can understand what the policy will be before we have enunciated it, because it comes from first principles, and that this is actually more electorally successful in the end than being purely managerial. Because ultimately, given the choice... We all now know Alfage, Archbishop of Canterbury, born in Weston, a village bordering North East Somerset and Bath. He is really the first tax martyr. he was called upon to pay the Danegeld, and he took £48,000 to the Danes then at Greenwich and handed it over, and they said, "Mr. Alphage, we would like some more, and if you don't give us more, we're going to hold on to you as a hostage." And Alphage replied that I won't give you more, I will not put higher taxes on my people. I will not have them suffer this imposition. And so they threw ox bones at Alphage until he died. Now, I hope that people won't find it necessary to throw ox bones at me, but I think as another representative from North East Somerset, I will stand constantly for low taxation. And the final figure I'm going to mention in this great pantheon of wonderful figures from God's own part of God's own county is John Locke, brought up in Baluton, and this really is a sop to the Whig coalition that we now have, the philosopher of the Whigs, and in many ways the founder of the Constitution that we now have.